Well, hi everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Speed Dips by Bob and Chad. Outstanding weekend this last weekend. I don't think that anybody had a rain out. There was lots of races going on. I went to Friday night and Saturday night in Marshalltown and Boone. Excellent show. Both nights was a great program, and pretty much that's about it. And by the looks of how today went Monday wise, looked like a lot of people raced, and I know we got quite a few feature winners, which was pretty exciting. And so it was kind of nice to have a full weekend of racing rather than rain or partial rain. So what's new and exciting at Wehrs Machine, Chad?
Well, we're just kicking off another new week here. Pretty busy today with all the weekend orders and getting things rolling here, working on some new stuff and working on the trackside support, getting ready for next week. I think we're planning on going to 141 and then heading right to Cedar Lake for the Masters for that deal. So it'll be a long week for the factory support team.
Yeah, 141 starts Monday, right?
Yeah.
Practice is Monday and then races Tuesday and Thursday, or Tuesday and Wednesday, I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of nice because the last few years it's been an overlap with Cedar Lake. So if you stay at 141, you miss the first night at Cedar Lake. So now it's just going to be 5 days in a row or 6 days in a row. So
awesome. And what's the show at Cedar Lake again?
It's the USMTS, the Masters.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, duh. I should have known
that. Yeah.
Should have known that. Jerry, hi guys. Steve is watching. Awesome. Well, like I said, we appreciate that. We appreciate all you guys watching, and we look forward to this every other week and hanging out with everybody and visiting for an hour and talking racing and talking setup stuff. It's a lot of fun.
When's the Harris Clash? How many days? What's the countdown?
63 days to the Harris Clash. Man, I tell you what, I can't wait. We've had some registrations here this last week already, and so we've got some pre-registers already, which is exciting. It's going to be a good show. They've done some work on the racetrack, and which I don't know why. I didn't know they needed to do some work, but I was told that they did some work to the racetrack, and it's supposed to be bigger and better. And looking forward to that. And I always love that show. And of course, I love your involvement. But I mean, it's just a neat deal, and it's there's kind of a way to give back to the racers, give them a great place to race that they don't normally get to race on, and Deer Creek does such an awesome job. I mean, those guys up there are phenomenal, and it's pretty cool. Okay, Dan, first question. You guys know anything about the left front, right rear, and the right front, left rear brake bias thing going on? Boy, Dan, I don't know. That's a new one to me. I've not heard anything about that. I'd have to think about how that would work. I mean, excuse me a second. Humidifier has to turn on. No, Dan, I've not heard anything about that. I'll ask some questions tomorrow to see if anybody at the shop has heard anything about that. I'm not really sure how that would actually work, to be honest. I suppose you could dial right front brake out of it, but yeah, I don't know. Rick's got a question. My B-Mod has a 2-inch drop cup on both sides in front. Shouldn't it be level on the left and drop on the right? Also, there's a galling from the spring on the cup. Can the Torrington bearing be used on any style of cup which is made with straps? that create an uneven surface.
Yeah. So the Torrington bearings, I don't know if I got a set out here in the showroom or not, but the Torringtons came about to help that spring through the motion of the twist. I don't see any out here. Got to work on my props. But anyway, if you put it on a cup, like I think I know the old school cups you're talking about where there's the 4 straps and then that bearing will sit in there kind of goofy. I think you're going to end up breaking the straps. We've actually had a few instances where guys have broke the washer because their end coil of their spring wasn't made quite perfect and it had a tiny little sharp spot on it. So it went in that Torrington bearing and actually broke the washer. But once they ground that little lip of the end coil off, it went away. But also having the OD grab and the shielding that it keeps the dirt out of there is essential too. If you run an open old school cup or like our 285 series cups that are ID grab and don't have the shield for the bearing, you're going to get the dirt in there and it's just going to beat that bearing up and it's going to be miserable to work on pretty much every single night to clean it out and fix it. So it's worth the money and the investment, I think, to get the OD cups and a swivel cup. So you eliminate that galling on the end of the screw jack and then also get the Torrington bearings on there to make the springs happy. So I know it's a pretty big investment. You're probably looking at total both sides roughly 250, 275 ish, I think, for cups and screw jacks and Torringtons. So, but I think Bob will attest that the Torringtons have been a huge improvement on the whole handling package and the spring life.
Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't run a car without the Torrington bearing, but it's crucial to use the enclosed cup, because otherwise that bearing, it would just have too much debris and too much stuff inside that bearing. I'm afraid that bearing would blow apart.
Yeah.
In that kind of a situation, it needs to be kind of in an enclosed area. But your first question was, you said you have 2-inch drop cups on both sides. I don't actually run a drop cup on the left front, and then I run a regular drop cup on the right front. So that's just kind of what we've always done and had real good luck with it. Tanner, hey guys, the Midwest Modified was great in the heat race. Track slicked off for the feature and I was lacking forward grip coming out of the turn. I didn't make any changes. How do I increase drive off in these conditions? Well, that's a great question. I had that same question at Boone the other night. I was talking to one of our drivers and was asking questions about what changes you can make. My go-to, especially on a 2-link type car, is lead. I always lengthen the left side 2 turns. That helps the tail stay underneath the car coming off the corner. And most generally, if it's going to slick up off the corner, it's going to slick up in the middle of the corner. So a lot of times, and this is, of course, if you've got like the Wehrs Panhard bar, we'd go 1 click down on the Panhard bar just to give it so it's got a little bit extra side bite for the slick conditions. And then the lead to help get the car off the corner makes quite a bit of difference. And you guys have a little bit of a problem. Well, I mean, the way your rules are structured, you can't really change the height of your bars a lot. But what I would do if I could, I would drop my right rear bar down 1 hole on the chassis or raise it 1 hole on the cage. But once again, with your rules in a Midwest Modified, you can't. You could probably adjust it on the frame, but it's kind of the way the rules are written, you're not really going to adjust a whole lot there. But you can do trail and lead, and I would definitely put lead in the car. Luke's got a Northern Sport Mod. Rear of the car bounces off the corner. 250-pound right rear spring are in good condition. That that bounce coming off the corner, that's something that sometimes it's a racetrack deal, but most generally it's a situation where it could very well be a shock situation. I know that the shocks are in good shape, but it might be a situation where if you've got, a split valve shock on the right rear, sometimes they can create a little bit of a bounce coming off the corner. And I've also found that if I have too much trailing arm angle in my right rear, that sometimes can create a bounce too. But the other thing that you need to really look at is make sure that the chain isn't tight on those situations, because if the car comes up against the chain, that's going to automatically cause a bounce. And so that's something to keep in mind too. Maybe give it a little bit more free chain. And how I normally set my right rear chain is I set the chain so that the spring just has like 5 pounds of load on it, the right rear spring. So it's basically just sitting in there. It's not free, but it doesn't have much load. Some guys will have that chain so that you've got an inch of load on there, and that will definitely create a bounce in the right rear. Tim, what are good bar angles left and right? Very slick racetrack, Michigan track, A-mod. We run our left rear. I run our left rear 45 to 50 degrees up if I'm running the zero indexing stuff, where I won't have the chance of camming over. The right rear, the left rear lower. Boy, we're all over the board on that. We've got some guys that got 10 degrees of angle, and we've got some guys that have, 4 or 5. Right rear, the upper is usually at about 18 degrees of angle. The right lower is usually at about 2 or 3. And then you can actually lower that right lower if it's really slick getting in. You can drop it down to the point where it's at 0 degrees, and that'll tighten the car up on corner entry. Any more open motor guys running with crates? Of course, for me down here in IMCA land, you're pretty much, to be competitive in an IMCA A-mod, you almost got to run a crate motor. The B-mod guys with the 5-inch spoiler, they're running some open motors with their 2-barrel carburetors. That's pretty common. But the A-mods, it's pretty rare. What was your opinion on those bar angles, Chad?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking that, the left bottom rod is one of them ones, like you say, you got guys in different ranges, and I feel like more times than not, it depends on the radius of the corner. So if it's a tight little bow ring, you're automatically going to have more left bottom rod angle to get the steer quicker, so you transition through the apex. And if you're on a big sweeping corner track, you probably can take some of that left bottom rod steer and influence away so that you can square up and run down a big long straightaway. So I mean, it really does kind of depend on the shape of the corner, I feel, on that left bottom rod. The other 3 are pretty standard, I mean, then you get to where you just basically tune that right rear and marry the left upper, and I feel like the left bottom rod is more of the track radius.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Matt wants to know if we've got any thoughts on negative bar angle on the right rear. What's your opinion on that, Chad?
Yeah, some guys definitely do go below 0. That's through the end of the night on the right bottom rod, just to get that traction. Sometimes it can make you too free in. So again, you got to think about if the car is completely smashed on the right rear all the way down the straightaway and you get in the corner, if you're not lifting out of the throttle and transition that right rear to a point where you're going to get free when that thing wheelbase is back, then that's kind of that one of them deals where if you get a little's good and too much is bad. So you got to be careful how below 0 or negative you go, because the reaction with the suspension cage there and the roll steer can get erratic at times.
Well, it definitely is a sensitive situation when you start going below. It just all depends, like Chad said, just depends on the circumstances.
A lot of times with that right rear, if you're just looking for a timing deal, putting that thing down will give you the traction, but longer arms on the right rear would give you maybe the timing that you're looking for there to delay that roll steer and give you the traction off the corner when, the angle kind of does two things, one on entry and one on exit. So maybe it's just lengthening the bars to slow that center of the corner transition.
What's been your experience with longer bars on the left lower?
Yeah, the left lower. I mean, there's guys all over the board, and we've been selling a lot of longer bars. But again, when you look at the zero index versus non-zero, the guys are manipulating the bar lengths to not cam over also. But my problem, I think, on an 8-inch tire car going into the corner, the longer you make the left bottom rods, the lazier the thing is to get into the middle. And if you can't get into the corner, then you can't get off, because if you got to give more wheel to make the phase 2 of the corner, if you will, then you're going to be sideways off the corner. So you put the long rod on to try and delay it and do things with your steer and manipulate it. But at the end of the day, you kind of hurt that entry enough to defeat the purpose in my book.
Cool. Matt was talking about, the sport mod. Well, actually, Matt, with the sport mod, I'd really be leery of going below level. I'm afraid that would make the car just way too tight. It would really scrub speed, in my opinion, in the middle of the corner, because when you go to that negative angle, now keep in mind when you go to the negative angle, that right rear tire is coming forward all the time. It never has a chance to go back before it can go back forward. So you're going to have a real tight condition in the middle. Now, back in the day, John Logue Sr. was definitely one of them guys that definitely ran negative angle at Boone Speedway, and it worked very well for him at Boone Speedway. So I'm not saying that it isn't the situation, but from what I see now, our horsepower and our tire was a little better back then, to the point where I'm not so sure that, with that 2-barrel carburetor and the 9-to-1 engine or whatever their open motor is, I don't think we have the power to power through it like we used to could years ago. Tim, so what is your max lower left bar angle B, sweeping corner? I would say 10, 12 degrees. I mean, like McBurney's car, we've ran that up there 10, 12 degrees. It definitely makes the car rotate the middle awesome. Doesn't have quite the drive off the corner that you would expect it to have, because when both bars are pointed up, kind of what happens is it gets, the condition hikes up fairly quickly and doesn't last near as long. So that's kind of the problem that we ran into, was we could go through the middle of the corner super great, but if it was really, really slick coming off, we didn't feel like we had that 100 feet past the corner. We didn't have the traction straightaway speed that I'd like to see the car have when we played with that. So like this last weekend, we were a lot less bar angle, and he ended up running fourth. Jeremy Mills won, and Jeremy's car looked really awesome. He did a great job, Todd Shute, and I don't remember who actually was third, but anyway, those guys had a heck of a race. They were all 4 around the top, bumper to bumper, and they did a great job. So what about left rear indexing? If you take indexing out of the car, will it harm traction? What's your opinion?
I think so. Same thing when you unindex the cage at ride height. and it screws up that transition into the corner, I feel like it's going to hurt the exit.
Yeah, that's kind of my opinion too.
Do you see that, Adam? You missed that, Adam, there?
Oh, I did. How goes it this evening, Bob and Chad? Seen Chad make some appearances at the Minnesota Dirt Video at USMTS show at Deer Creek. My question is, we tore off a single shear 3-link bracket in a wreck this past weekend on one of our cars. Going to order a double shear bracket from Wehrs this week and was wondering how to go about setting the zero indexing before welding it on the axle tube.
So I don't know what your other side is, but it kind of depends on how the other side's welded on too. But when we basically set up a 2-link car, we want the center 4.5 hole to be perfectly level, the plate be level, and then your pinion angle will be in there. So on a 2-link car, you probably got 7-8 degrees, Bob.
Yeah.
So with the pinion angle at 7, whatever you're running for your pinion angle, that cage, that shock plate would be square to the world. And then when you make a bar change, then you got the level in there. So you reference that level on the cage, make a bar change, and then you adjust the length to get the level correct. And then you're ready to go to the speedway and you don't have to make any adjustments to the pinion angle. So they are on an arc, but it's not perfect for everybody's bar length. So it's close. So you always have to double check your cage index after you make a bar adjustment just to make sure that your indexing didn't change.
Yeah, Adam said he's going to upgrade both of them to double shears.
Yeah, so then...
and what we do is, well, of course, our deal's got a jig to make sure that stuff's right. But you just set that thing on a level surface and set those cages flat on that level surface, tip the pinion angle down to 7 degrees, and she's good to go. And what we normally do on those 2-link cars, like I said, I don't know where your car is at now, but we always fix it so that the right side only has 1 inch of toe in, so it's 1 inch narrower in the front than in the rear. And then the left side, I always set it so it's 2 inches. So the left bar toe is a little bit 2 inches. If you set the right side at 1 inch of bar toe, then when the car rolls over, that bar is perfectly straight.
Yeah, you mentioned the Minnesota Dirt Video. We were testing a new part out there, so we're very excited about it. It went really well. It's going to be coming up soon. Can't say anything about it because I don't want anybody else to know what we're doing, but it's going to change the game a little bit and make things a lot better.
Awesome. Thoughts on a 100-pound spring loaded on an IMCA sport rod? Well, Luke, I'll give you my personal opinion on that deal. I think there's a lot to be gained traction-wise with that 100-pound spring loaded. But I also see that the cars are a little bit inconsistent. So it kind of, if we could be on a coilover or on a slider, it would be a whole different world. But with that spring being in there where it's got all bound up and it's just, it unloads unevenly, and it loads unevenly. And I've seen, some guys really like it, but, I watched a car the other night at Boone that, man, I'll tell you what, he came off the corner like Jack the Bear, and he's running like something like an 80-pound left rear. And the car was awesome for half a dozen laps, but then it got to the point where it was hard for him to make consistent laps. Now, I'm not saying the spring was the problem, but every time I've tried that spring with a driver, that's been the problem we've run into. Certain racetracks, she's killer, man. But some racetracks where there's a little more driver technique involved, I'm still not on the fence. If I was building a car for myself, I don't think I would go that soft on a 2-link car. That's just my opinion. Not saying that there's not some guys out there that are making it work good. they've evidently found some way of making things more consistent than I know about at this point in time. And that's my only complaint is I think that 100 is a little inconsistent. Chad, you got to make longer versions of them body bolt inserts.
Yeah, we do have that change done in place for the next batch. That'll be, I forget what the length change was. I think it was 80 thousandths or something for an extra fold in the panel. And then we changed it from a little bit thicker. We made the head a little bit thicker too. And then instead of a hex, it's going to have just 2 long flats, so you get on it better with the wrench. So made a lot of improvements to that one. Should be good once we get the next batch rolling.
Jeremiah, Northern Sport Mod, moving the right rear bar down on the chassis versus up on the rear end. What effect do you see? Been playing with that corner, but haven't gotten similar enough racetrack conditions to make a good connection to what changes do. Personally, what I have found the best success with is moving it up. If I move it up on the cage, I move it up on the frame too. I want to keep the same angle so that my roll steer stays the same and that the car rolls and the right rear moves back like it's supposed to. But moving it up on the rear end, it changes the timing of that effect, and it definitely gives the car more traction, more straightaway traction. That's been kind of a go-to that we've had for a year or so. Every time I've dropped it on the frame, it seems like I've tightened the car up too much in the middle of the corner because I took too much angle out of that right rear bar and made that car to the point where all of a sudden in the middle of the corner it got kind of tight. Well, then what happens is the driver will turn it one way or the other. And in the normal situation, then you bust the tires loose and you lose traction off. Or if you can keep the car rotating through the middle without any tightness, then moving it up on the cage definitely helps the car come up off the corner. Chad, whatever this new thing is, will you be emailing us about that or on your list?
Yeah, for sure. That as soon as they're ready to go. I know the marketing team has been wanting to do a start to finish, of a product. So where the idea comes from, and then basically it's going to be like a little movie of this part's life. So from the driver that brought us the idea to us guys sitting in the room talking about, if it's worth doing and how it will change things, and then Billy and I going to the design room and designing the product, and then the machine shop cutting the part, and we went to Deer Creek and tested it, and we filmed all this, and we're putting together a how it's made kind of basically on a Wehrs machine part, from the idea to the creation to the shelf into your guys' hands and on your cars to make your cars better. And we're excited about it. The marketing team is killing it. They got the video and the production that they're doing, and they're ambitious, and Colby that's in charge is a racer. He races the USRAB mod, so I mean he understands kind of what we're doing, so that's going to be really cool when they get that done. I've watched it to the point of the testing last week, and I tell them guys, if you make my hair stand up, I think you're doing it right. And this video is pretty cool. To go through the whole process is pretty neat. So excited for that to drop. Excited for the product because it's really going to improve the whole rear suspension of the car. So we're excited about it.
Awesome. Luke, any suggestions for a sport mod driver that tends to like it to be off the throttle on corner entry to getting a push in the center? Well,
roll center
sometimes how I go about explaining things to drivers isn't necessarily gentle and smooth and caressful, and where always make them feel just all fuzzy about themselves. So I'll eliminate that part from this equation. You're just going to have to work with the driver. The biggest thing is and I tell these guys, if the car's set up right and if the car's working right, the biggest problem is drivers have that feel, that right rear tire being loose. So they have the ultimate fear of spinning out, which, I was a driver. You spin out in front of a group of cars, guaranteed it's going to hurt. It's going to cost you a bunch of money. It's going to cost some other people a bunch of money, and they're not going to be your number one fan. And you'll have more people discussing stuff with you about how you should be driving than you really need to. But just keep working with him. Roll the car in. If the car's right, if the car starts to get a little free, you just got to have that trust in the car that when you get on the throttle, the car will pull itself up underneath you. And trust me, it's a fear of many, many racers, and I don't blame them. That's the number one thing. There's two things that I hear: no forward bite, or I don't have any right rear feel. And that's the most common thing. And most generally, if you don't have any right rear feel, you don't have any forward bite, because we always focus on hooking the left rear up, but we got to hook the right rear up equally as much to get the car to come off the corner, because we only got 8 inches of tire. So you just got to work with the driver and try to get him, like in hot laps, to follow one of the guys, and run run in there and just he's just going to have to build faith in himself and faith in the car. Sean, what would you recommend for caster camber for a low bank quarter mile for a metric front end with stock truck link rear stock car? Awesome. Well, the old adage always has been, camber wise, get what you can get. If you can get 6 degrees, that's a good thing. Kind of depends on how much the camber actually gains, but you don't want to be running on the sidewall of the tire. You want to be running on the face of the tire. So 6 degrees of negative camber is pretty good. Caster wise, with those stock OEM, somewhere in that 5 degree range, 5 degrees positive is pretty good. Left front, once again, depending on what your rules are, and with our stock cars, the way the weight jack bolt has to be in the car, best we can get is about 2 degrees of camber. I myself would prefer to have 4 degrees of positive camber in the left front, but get what you can get there. 4 degrees, if you can get it, would be ideal. Caster, you're going to want to run around about half what you run on the right front, on the left front. So somewhere in that 2.5 degrees positive is going to be a great place to start. You can kind of tune it from there, but that's going to be good. If you get too much caster, the problem is you're going to have a bump steer issue, which might actually make the car worse than having the caster in it. So you have to kind of understand how that all works too. Kinson, how much lead would be a good start on a USRA B mod? I would start with a quarter of and keep in mind when we talk about lead, we're talking about statically, because dynamically, our B mods, they steer about 2 3/4 of an inch. So the car is always going to be in a trail situation when the car's in dynamic. But statically, I would go, I've never really liked to run more than 1/2 inch. That would have to be on a really dry, slick racetrack and a lot of bar angle in the left rear. But 1/4 of an inch is a good place to start. James wants to know your estimated time for release on this new project.
Well, I got the curiosity fired up.
What you do?
I think we're probably 3 weeks out, so they should go to the plater next week. So it's about a 3-week turn right now, I believe. So I can, I'll push them a little harder. By the next show,
we'll have a little bit more information in 2 weeks of when that's going to be released.
we're gonna know for sure then.
We'll be pretty close.
I'll have the exact date of that one.
So you all need to tune in in the next session, which is 2 weeks from today, which would be actually the 19th of June, and we'll have we will have a release date for you then. How's that sound?
It's exciting.
Okay, cool. How much traction can you get out of a right rear chain? I currently have a chain set just so that the spring does not get loose. Well, and Henry, we kind of talked about that a little bit ago. If the racetrack is real smooth, you could probably, I've had guys go a half an inch, but I'd be a little leery. You'd be better off to talk to your shock builder and get some more rebound put in your right rear shock rather than trying it with the chain, because the chain is just way too sensitive on that right rear. You get a ripple in the racetrack or a rut or whatever, and you've got some preload in that thing, and you're going to hit that thing, and all of a sudden that right front's going to turn towards the fence. And if you don't hit the fence, the driver's going to want a pit stop for clean shorts. It's just kind of how it's going to be. The way you've got it, Henry, is kind of how we always set ours, just so that it has, like I said, 5 pounds of load on it, so that I'm not coming off the spring at any point in time, and that works pretty well. Sean wants to know, can you explain the different advantages and preferred locations on the right rear spring location, front, center, behind the housing for an IMCA stock car? The right rear, if you put it in front, I think it actually puts too much traction in the right rear, makes the car free. If you put it behind the housing, that's going to give you a lot of traction, but it also can make the car a little bit tight in the center. So I've always kind of that right rear, because the right rear, once again, it's keep in mind, it's loaded all the time. So it's pretty finicky on adjustments back there, or pretty sensitive, I should say. And so we've always just been in the middle of the housing, because then it doesn't have an adverse effect on anything. It's just basically holding the car, pushing the tire down, and works pretty well on that. But the advantage in certain racetracks, if you had a racetrack with real sharp corners, tight exit where you had to drag race off the corner, that right rear behind is definitely going to give you maximum traction when you're going forward. Henry says, you are my shock builder. Well, great. Well, that just made my day, Henry. I appreciate that. Well, then I don't know what Bobby's got you set up on, but if you've got a right rear slick, more than likely that's the shock you need. We've made some other valving that's maybe a little bit more extensive, but once again, I think you're on the way you're setting it and using your right rear slick shock when slick track conditions are, you should be pretty well dialed in. Jeremiah says, I can attest to the chain. Made it too short one time. Anytime I was on the throttle at all, it went straight towards the fence. Plenty of traction, but no control. Yeah, you're right, Jeremiah. That's exactly how they work. No doubt about it. Lots of traction, but you're not really sure where you're going next.
Yeah, I remember my brother and I found that. We thought we were heroes and ended up being zeros.
Yeah, that happens. There's no doubt about that. No doubt about that. So are you going with the factory support team next week, I mean?
I can't go to 141. I have a new employee starting on Monday, so
okay.
I'm obligated to stay here and do that. So I might run over there Wednesday. I don't know, but I'll probably be at Cedar Lake for sure. Billy's got to come back and race at Deer Creek, so Billy and Josh are rolling out Monday, and then I'll join up the tour later in the week probably.
Gotcha. Um, okay, Bryce has got the question. How do you? Well, no, wait a minute. Sorry,
Clayton.
Bryce. I'm gonna have to take Clayton's first. How do you set right rear load without a spring smasher? Basically, a tape measure. Um,
Math.
yeah, just mathematically setting it, with the tape measure. Um, how do you feel about lowering the right rear upper? Hang on a second here, guys.
Just moved a bunch.
I moved a bunch. Okay. How do you feel about lowering the right rear upper on the cage to index into the spring quicker than raising it on the chassis? Well, keep in mind, anytime and Chad can probably explain this better than I can, but anytime you change it on the cage, you're changing a timing effect more so than not. But go ahead, Chad. You can probably explain that better than I can.
Yeah, I mean, that'll definitely index into the spring quicker and make more right rear build load faster coming off the corner. But anytime you do that, you're probably, depending on the time of the night, later in the night, you're probably going to get free just because of increasing that right top rod. So that might be something you do early in the night when the track is heavy to get that thing to rotate and build that spring stiffness early in the night, and then later in the night you'd go back up to slow that back down and not be so erratic, basically.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. Okay, so Mason, sorry if you've answered this already. I just joined. What's the difference between the new pull bar shock mounted to the pull bar itself versus the chassis and the rear end? Advantages and disadvantages. Well, from what I've actually seen, and Chad will chime in here too, but what I've actually seen is when you mount it in line with the pull bar itself, you're basically controlling the pull bar. You're not necessarily loading or unloading the chassis. Where when you have it up on the rear end, on top of the rear end, pushing up against the chassis, depending on where it's located, it actually can tighten the car up. It'll load the right rear and give you more side bite getting in. So that's something to consider. What's your opinion, Chad?
Yeah, I mean, spot on. Pretty much, we put it next door to eliminate the control of the chassis and just control the pull bar. I mean, years ago we were traveling the pull bars a lot more, and there was more motion in the cars. Now with the cars kind of staying up and not falling on that left rear at all, that shock has less of an influence on the pull bar. So they're putting it next door to the pull bar to basically control the axle wrap because we're doing so much to keep the cars up now that. But like you said, the valving of that shock will influence the tires on the rear, depending on how stiff it is, and also control the motion. But anytime you take that shock and go up to the chassis and you have angle like that, it's not going to do as much for that index for the axle wrap as it is when it's like that in line with it. So it's a driver feel. You'll line up 10 guys and 10 guys will say, I hate it next door, and the other 5 will say they hate it, 5 will say they love it. So that's one of them things that you got to try it both ways and just experience the difference. Yeah. And some guys don't even feel a difference. So, and it also depends on the shock, how it's valved and whatever. You can manipulate that thing pretty hard, as you know, and I'm sure you have a wide variety of valvings built there. So but yeah, it's definitely, I think, driver feel more than anything.
Yeah, because there's a wide variety of valving depending on what the pull bar is. Because certain pull bars need, like if you're a total biscuit bar, you'll have a very soft valving shock up there. A spring or anything that has some free play in it, you've got to have a lot stiffer shock up there.
Yeah, springs store way more energy when they decel. They come back to their free height basically instantly, where the puck style bars take a split second longer to get back to their free height. So definitely two different packages for sure.
Yep. Dry slick track with 60 G60s grooved sight pattern. What do you like? Some of the patterns are awful elaborate, seems to be a little over the top and have a lot less tread. Thoughts? Well, when you have 8 inches of tread on a tire, why would you cut away some of that tread for a dry slick racetrack? It makes minimal sense to me why some of these guys, and putting grooves in it definitely give you knife edges, but they're taking surface away from the tire. The only time I really actually recommend grooving a tire is after it's got a couple nights on it and you need to groove it. I will say that outside circumference, or the one that goes around the tire, that outside lip, I always open that up so that I gain side bite in the tire. And so traction wise, I don't go a lot of grooves, and I'll definitely do some sight patterns, but I don't think those tires need a tremendous amount of grip. Now, if you're running on a real heavy racetrack and stuff like that, yeah, grooving those tires definitely is an advantage. But that's where you can take a 2-night-old tire, groove it for a heavy type racetrack, and now you've got a brand new tire on the car that's going to do a great job for you. But on a real dry slick racetrack, I would have some moderate siping, and I would groove around the tire to make sure that those 2 outside grooves clear on the outer edge of the tire, open that tire up so that I get additional side bite out of the tire, is where my concern really is. Hi, Joey. How's my old buddy KS? Well, it's you guys been? I didn't see anything where you guys raced last weekend. I didn't see any posts or anything. So maybe the boss gave you the weekend off or something.
NASCAR in St. Louis. He was probably hanging out there.
Oh, gotcha. Sure. Yeah, that would be the thing to do. Yep. Yeah, Kyle Busch made those guys look pretty. He did an awesome job. His car was pretty good. A lot of brake problems they had last weekend down there.
I didn't get to watch it, but my dad was talking about that this morning, that the brakes were flying apart.
Oh man, a lot of right fronts. I mean, there was like 4 of them that fenced it because of right front brake rotors. IMCA Sport Mod, what does lengthening the left chain actually do for you? Free you up, giving you more steer, or help the left rear drive harder by giving it more bar angle? Actually, it does both. It actually does both. It gives you a little bit more steer, but by giving you more angle, it'll rotate the middle of the corner a little bit better, and then it'll actually let the car gain more trailing arm angle coming off the corner. It's kind of sometimes, it can be a 50-50 type deal where the more trailing arm angle helps you, but the more steer doesn't help you. So it's kind of a trade-off, but it definitely, that's kind of my opinion on that. Yeah, I wondered if you guys took the weekend off. I didn't see any posts because I usually try to keep up with what you guys are doing. Joey, getting ready to go to 141. That's going to be an exciting race. Those guys always put on a pretty good show up there. Ryan, what does adding preload to the brake biscuit of a pull bar do? Does a higher load number on the brake side make more aggressiveness on the brake or less? It'll actually tighten the car up, just whether you're on the brakes or or off the throttle. It just, whenever you back off the throttle, when you have more or less biscuit to move, it's just going to make it more severe. It'll actually load the right front, try to stick the right front a little bit harder. But it can unload the car a little bit too. IMCA Sport Mode. What's good spacing on the front motor mount thickness of the spacers? Well, Jason, it's really hard to say where your motor mounts are, but like in our GRT cars, we were on a 1-inch spacer for the crate motors. And actually, the steel-headed motors, we used to actually run without the spacer, but we found that raising that engine up a little bit, it helps the car roll to the right front a little bit more, sticks the right front a little better. So we actually run a 1-inch spacer between our motor mount on the engine block and the motor mount on the chassis. Suggested stagger on a sport mod, not IMCA, low UMP car, dry slick, and heavy. Well, when it's real heavy, of course, sometimes I don't know if there's too much stagger. It just kind of depends on what your tires go. But like on a real heavy racetrack, I try to get 2.5 inches of stagger in the rear and 1 inch in the front. I always run 1 inch in the front. I know there's some guys that run more than 1 inch in the front, but I always run 1 inch in the front. And then I go between 1.5 inches when it's slick and 2.5 inches when it's heavy. It's pretty much what I've always run, especially on a sport mod type car. Travis, if I moved my solid pull bar to the right of the chassis, what can I expect the car to do differently? IMCA Sport Mod. If you move it to the right side of the chassis, the car is going to be a little bit, you're not really going to notice. I'm not totally sure you would notice a whole lot. Moving it on the rear end, you would definitely notice a difference because the further you move it to the right, the more it affects the right rear and loads the right rear off throttle and on throttle. Moving just the front, in theory, it should try to give you more traction by lifting the right front up, but I've not proved it to myself that actually really makes a ton of difference. What I would be a little nervous about is if I got too much angle on there, I'm afraid that the car might be a little finicky on corner entry because it's not it's at an angle rather than more straight. And yeah, like Joby said, on a sport mod, legally you can't actually move it because the rule says it has to be within the drive shaft. Within the sides of the drive shaft is where the pull bar needs to be, front and back. And they'll look at that. You can fudge probably 1 inch, but you still got to be pretty much within that window. When they want to open up your back hatch and look down your pull bar, something's better be in line with that drive shaft. Nice point, Joby. I appreciate you putting that in there. IMCA Sport Mod. While maintaining the angle of the left rear bar, what does moving the whole bar up or down do? Well, from my experiences, if you drop it on the rear end on the left rear, you're getting more leverage. It might slow it down a little bit, but the leverage itself is stronger in my opinion, and you just actually get more angle on it that way. What's your opinion, Chad?
Yeah, keeping the angle the same and moving it up and down, I feel is higher is freer and lower is traction on exit. It's basically a timing out of the roll steer, just timing out that transition point through the corner based on the height of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I would agree with that too. Joby, on an IMCA Northern Sport Mod with both rear chains, what's the best way to measure your spring load, one side at a time or both hanging? Well,
Spring load on the chains. I mean, theoretically, you're only going to hit that right rear chain when you're climbing down the straightaway. So you want to be loaded when you're hanging, right?
Yep.
Loaded
Yeah,
a quarter hanging in the shop.
and I don't know about doing that with a load stick. What's your opinion of that? I mean,
Well, you can't really
do the right rear.
No, I mean the load stick on an axle is kind of difficult. You got to have a setup stick for the opposite side set up at ride height to be able to use the load stick on a 2-lane car. You can do it because you don't have the cage rotation to influence your numbers, but it's just kind of more of a pain in the butt than anything. Doing the math on the rear springs is pretty easy. You can definitely use the load stick, and we got a lot of stock car guys that are doing it, and some sport mod guys that have your scaled center to centers just like you do on the front. You'll have your scaled center to center on the back, and then you make a solid stick to go in. So if you have the load stick on the right rear of the car, you'll have a solid stick on the left rear. You put the load stick on the left, you'll have a solid on the right, and you can kind of get your ride height and get some benchmark numbers to go off of there. However, if you make changes to anything, it kind of makes that number vary. So consistency is an issue, and when you're dealing with loads and trying to get data that you want, you need to be consistent in that. So a lot of guys don't play with that there.
Well, it's kind of one of them deals where you'll do it once, and then all of a sudden it's an awful lot of work for what you get out of it, to the point where, like you said, it's almost easier doing the math on the springs. Your end result is still basically about the same, and for the most part, it's pretty close. So set your rear spring load at droop against the chain, or am I misunderstanding? Setting the rear spring load at droop against the chain. Well, yeah, the right rear, you set it against the chain at droop, just so that the spring has, like I said, about 5 pounds of load on it. And the left rear is the same thing. You set the chain to a certain, like 18 inches, 18 and a half, or depending on whatever your car builder says to do, and then load the spring accordingly.
Yeah, you're going to have load in the left rear. So when you get the car scaled and ready to go, and you have your center to center numbers, and you let the car droop or jack it up, and then you look at your right rear spring, if your chain is too loose, your right rear spring is going to be loose. So get a number from your ride height number. Let's just call it 20. And if that spring is loose at 21 and a half, then you want your chain to be 21 and a quarter, basically, so that right. Spring has tension on it. When you're going down the straightaway and that thing's climbing, and you'd have been proud of me. I took old school data acquisition at Deer Creek with a string.
Awesome.
But we were really focusing on this, the right rear as it's climbing, going down the straightaway, timing that traction out. So, and trying to figure out if there is magic with that chain at that, when you're climbing, going down the straightaway and that traction's building down the straightaway, if there's anything there to time that out is what I wanted to see. And you obviously can't run data acquisition on a car, but you can use string. So I went back to my 90s crew chief and used some string. And actually the number that we got on the track with the string was very close to it hanging on the chain with a 1/4 inch of preload, what we wanted to see at the end of the straightaway. So the numbers kind of jived, like just hanging there with the rear end hanging. So we were pretty happy with what we found on the on track there.
Awesome. RC, do you all like a chain on the right rear? It seems like it's real finicky where you set it. It is very finicky where you set it. However, if you set it like what we talked about, where you have 1/8 of an inch of load or only 1/4 of an inch of load on that spring, it's not going to be real finicky. You would need to have, I recommend having a chain back there so that the car, when it goes down the straightaway, doesn't get off that spring, because then when you start to lift, it'll free fall for a split second and make the car kind of spooky getting into the corner. So I think it's a must to have the chain. I just don't like preloading a lot against the chain. I would never preload it more than 1/4. More than likely, I'd preload it 1/8, minimal amount. Chad Adams says, Chad, I need a replacement shaft for my WM 251-10-0 slider. is the 251 shaft the correct replacement?
So if it's I assume you mean 251-0. The zero body slider shaft is a 251-12, I believe. But yeah, you might want to measure the body of that. I don't know where you got the 10 number from. That doesn't add up. But if you give either Billy or Steve a call or me tomorrow, and we can get that dialed in, take some measurements of that, fully extended what it is, and we'll get that taken care of tomorrow.
All right, guys, we are out of time. Great questions tonight. Excellent group. A lot of people on here, so that was exciting. Time went super fast, so that was exciting, and very good contact. I'm very pleased with everything that we talked about tonight. A lot of it made a lot of sense, and hopefully it was very helpful for all you guys. We will plan on seeing everybody here in 2 weeks, which is, what did I say, the 19th. Well, go ahead and I'll answer Greg's. What do you think running heavy left rear spring? I don't run a real heavy left rear spring. It depends on what you're talking about, whether you're talking about a stock car or a modified or a sport mod. We don't, in the sport mod, anything, or even in the stock car, I'm not super fond of anything a whole lot lighter than a 125, but 150 is probably more realistic. Of course, with a modified, you can be down there around 80 pounds because you've got it on a slider, so you have some control. Sport mod. Yeah, sport mod, I've never had good luck with anything under 125-pound spring. Normally we like that 125, 150 range seems to be pretty good. All right, guys, we will see you in 2 weeks. Everybody have a great week, and hope you all have great success this coming weekend at the racetrack, and we will talk to you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everybody.